Hello, you're watching Around the World on France 24, and in this show, a focus on the protest movement in Iran. Well, let's take a look then at what's been 12 days of protests. Human rights groups say they've spread now to more than 60 cities. The demonstrations are driven by the soaring cost of living, fueled by a high inflation and the plummeting value of the rial. There is growing evidence, too, of a crackdown. At least 36 protesters have been killed by security forces. Now, first on the programme, we're going to take a look at one particular incident, this an attack by Iranian security forces on a hospital last week. And France 24's Ershad Aljani has been looking into that from our Observer's desk. He's with me in the studio now. So you've been investigating this. Just tell us what it was that happened. This is in Ilam.
Yeah, we have verified several videos showing Iranian securities attacking a hospital in the city of Ilam in the Kurdish region in western Iran on the night of 3 to 4 January. Security forces fired shotgun and used tear gas inside and around the hospital. And the aim of this operation was to detain protesters who had been injured earlier that day and had sought medical treatment there, and also remove the bodies of those killed. Many of them had been wounded in a nearby town called Arkavaz and were brought to this hospital by the local residents.
Okay, so do we know what happened then earlier on the day in Arkavaz?
Yeah, on the same day, around midday, thousands of people gathered in this town to protest. It was a peaceful protest, but suddenly they were being shot from a building belonging to Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps. In a video, we can see at last 3 bodies, as you see, lying on the ground. And we have a photo of the building belonging to IRGC. As you see, that people were being shot from that building. And we have another video that filmed moments later and from a different angle. We were able to geolocate the same building. Armed fires resumes, as you see in this footage, and at least 2 more people collapsed. Many others appear to be injured, and then we could geolocate this building and where protesters were shot, as you see. And yes, that's we could make a chronology of the events and.
Okay, so you were able to work out what happened before this incident at the hospital, but what happened at the hospital seems to be kind of the most shocking part of this.
Yes. What happened is that the security forces attacked the hospital in Ilam, where the wounded had been taken, and people tried to resist. But after several hours, and with the reinforcements, security forces stormed the building, as you see in the images. You see here the security forces arriving on motor cycles. They used violence, shotguns, and tear gas, and arrested a number of people inside the hospital.
What kind of reaction has there been to what happened?
Yep, the incident quickly drew international attention. It's a hospital. And the U.S. State Department Persian language account on X described the hospital raid as an act of savagery. Shortly afterwards of this post on X, Iranian authorities announced that an investigation would be launched. However, it's not the first time, and it's not an isolated case. During previous waves of protests in Iran in 2019, in 2022, Iranian security forces have repeatedly targeted medical facilities. Just 2 days ago, 3 days after this attack, another hospital, a Sina hospital, this time in Tehran, was affected. Security forces fired tear gas at the protesters who had taken refuge inside that hospital in Tehran.
All right, Ershad Alijani, thank you very much indeed for looking into the details of this particular incident and the attack on the hospital there in Ilam. Well, also with me on the programme is Ammar Maleki. He's an assistant professor of political science at Tilburg University. He's also the director of research at the foundation GAMAAN. Really good to talk to you today as well. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure to be with you.
First of all, can I just get your brief comments on what we were just hearing about, the security forces attacking this hospital?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is not strange to see these things because we know that how repressive is the Islamic regime in Iran, and also we should consider that they did something similar when they intervened in Syria. These are very familiar footages from 10 years ago when there are some protests within Syria, and we know that in that time Qasem Soleimani was in charge, and then they somehow tried to do these things. And normally they put blame on the protesters and mention that this is something from them. I think your colleague explained everything that should be said about that.
Well, zoom out for us then. Let's talk about the protests overall. They've been going on now for 12 days. We are not just talking about Tehran by any means, cities across the country. Who, crucially, is going out to protest?
We should consider that according to the kind of polling agency that is driven by the state institute, they mentioned that 92% of the population are dissatisfied with the situation. It doesn't mean that all of them are against the regime, but on the other hand, the survey that we conducted over past years showed that about 80% of this of the population mentioned that in a free referendum they say no to the Islamic Republic. Given the level of dissatisfaction and given that the people, the absolute majority of people don't want to have this regime, then we expect to see the kind of this type of nationwide protest, waves after waves. And so in that way, it's not really strange. And also add to that the kind of economic situation because of what happened after the war, and also the news, the kind of pressures on the economy. So it's not strange to see something like that. And as you said, that it is not just in Tehran or big cities. Today we know that in the reports showed that about 50 cities across the kind of ethnic regions and provinces of Kurdistan, East Azerbaijan, Ilam and Ardabil, and all those cities also were on the kind of a strike. So it's a kind of really nationwide protest, and we don't know that how it can be stopped.
Viewers may well remember the last big wave of protests in Iran back in 2022 after the death of Mahsa Amini, killed by security forces for not wearing her hijab correctly. Do you think that this protest movement could be as powerful, as large, perhaps even larger as what we saw back then?
Yes, it could be larger because considering the context that now we have after 12-day war, and also the president who is in charge in the United States, who for the first time directly and boldly mentioned that he may intervene if there is a kind of mass killing or something like that. So in that way, we know that the regime is much weaker now because the hundreds of generals and commanders were killed in that war, in the 12-day war. And also we know that now Israel and the United States also somehow watching, and they have some willing to intervene. So in that way, it's harder for the regime to suppress that one. And on the other hand, we know that the level of dissatisfaction is again growing and growing, and people try to change the kind of reform the regime in different ways, and it didn't work. And that's why we see the kind of more radical slogans and more radical demand for change and a kind of regime change on the streets.
Yeah, you mentioned Donald Trump. You said the regime is weak right now. I mean, we have obviously seen, as you mentioned, the kind of Iranian proxies throughout the region losing power over the last year. Donald Trump's comments threatening Iran, really. Now we have these protests. Is this the weakest moment so far for Ayatollah Khamenei?
Yeah, we can say definitely it is the weakest moment for him, and also given that the opposition and also the kind of different parts of the country, they want to have a kind of regime change. There is no kind of demand for reform or even a kind of that the issue of just economy or something. That's really challenging for him, and we should see that whether he can survive this time or not, and how the kind of these protest would go. So I think that for the people, it's a kind of ray of hope that maybe this time they can change the regime and bring another maybe free secular system in Iran.
Look, you mentioned the opposition. Is there a credible opposition of any kind waiting in the wings? I mean, we have exiled figures like Reza Pahlavi, but I don't know how much support he has within Iran.
Yeah, our surveys showed that he has a kind of a plurality of support in Iran. 1 out of 3 support him, 1 out of 3 oppose him, and 1 out of 3 may support or may not. So in that way, he has a kind of potential of getting majority of support. But on the other hand, we know that he could not be a kind of unifying figure. We know that, for instance, today that we have a kind of call from Kurdish and other ethnic parties, and we know that in those regions the support for Reza Pahlavi is much weaker than the other part of the country. But anyway, we cannot ignore that he has a support, and it can be growing depending how he can really do something and organizing something, and also contacting with other parts of the political spectrum in Iran. So there is a kind of diversity in Iran. We know that all different political orientation and ideologies have their own support. But anyway, he can maybe play a role if the kind of growing support he can absorb. It's not clear that whether he can do that or not, but anyway, there is a kind of potential for him.
Let's talk about how the government has been responding to this. We had the president, some of his senior advisors saying, look, they understand the frustration of protesters. They understand the economic situation isn't good. At the same time, though, we've seen this crackdown, as we've been documenting here, by the security forces, dozens of people killed. So is there a rift now within the Iranian leadership over how to respond to this protest movement?
Yeah, we know that the government doesn't have a real power. We know that everything is in the hand of the so-called supreme leader and the IRGC. So in that way, the government cannot really play a role here. And so, but on the other hand, we know that there is a kind of divide within the regime. We know that there is a kind of some reformist who wants to see that maybe the supreme leader is removed, and then they can maybe send a message that they can be a new actor, and maybe they accept many conditions expressed by the United States and Israel. There is a kind of, for sure, fight within the system. But anyway, it seems that the still control is in the hand of the supreme leader, and we should see that to what extent and how long he can keep that control.
Just a final thought from you then. What do you think the supreme leader Khamenei may be able to actually do now?
It's hard to say that, because we know that it is a real threat, that it can be the kind of a Venezuelan model would repeat in Iran. But on the other hand, we know that sometimes they try to do anything that they can for surviving the regime. This is very hard. I think he wants to show that he's still the leader of the resistance, as he called it. And but as we know, that it's really a weak situation for him. We don't know that he wants to resist and be killed, and because they in Islamic ideology they want to be martyr, and so those kind of things. But on the other hand, it could be also a chance that he decided to surrender to the conditions of Trump, and then the situation can be different. I think it's unlikely, because he's 86 and maybe he doesn't care about the people and his future. So maybe that's another option.
All right, Ammar Maleki talking to us there from the University of Tilburg. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis on these protests in Iran. Ershad Alijani from our Observers Desk, thank you very much as well. That's it for our deep dive into that protest movement in Iran. We're keeping a close eye on it, though, for you here on France 24. Time for a break from me. People and Politics is up next.